oftentimes you have teams or organizations where there's a good culture, but it isn't great. And what separates good from great is the willingness to have the hard conversation, the willingness to respectfully and tactfully disagree. Like, one of the myths of a speak up culture is that everyone gets along about all the things all the time. And it's like, no, the strength of a speak up culture is, do we debate and disagree well?
Hi, I'm Mike Pincus, co-founder at Connect CBA and your host at GrowthTales. Today's guest is Stephen Shedletzky, better known as Shed by his peers. Shed is a leadership and culture speaker, a coach, an advisor, an author, and of course, an entrepreneur. Speaking of being an author, Shed published a book called Speak Up Culture, which centers around providing insights to leadership teams and executives that want to operate in a team and culture where people are engaged and willing to speak up. Although Shed was quite humble in our chat, you can check out on Amazon that his book has an incredible 4.9 rating. In the conversation with Shed, we discussed his 2x2 matrix to help understand why team members may or may not speak up. We also discussed the acronym FBI, which stands for Feeling, Behavior, Impact, and how to utilize it while having a very difficult conversation. And how, as a leader, your team is always listening to you, so you have to be very thoughtful in how you communicate with them. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you do as well. Hey, Stephen, thanks so much for joining us on GrowthTales today.
Thanks so much, Mike. Delight to be here with you.
Steve, we've known each other a long time, and as you mentioned, like right before we jumped on the call, you go by Shed. We're going to call you Shed because I think it's more natural.
Yeah.
But we've never had anybody on that's published a book before, and I have a huge amount of respect for anybody that's written a book because I can imagine it is a very, very difficult, long process involving editing. And so I want to just dive in and ask you the first question, which was, what is the motivation behind writing Speak Up Culture?
Thank you. And yes, I think you do need motivation because for me, the hardest part of writing a book was the tediousness of going over the book. Again, like the number of times I leaned over to my wife during the evening saying, I finished writing the book again. Because like you feel like you write it 17 times. But yeah, I mean, this book was definitely and is definitely a labor of love, and it's semi-autobiographical. So there are a couple sort of pivotal moments in my life or experiences in my life and career that caused me to write this book. One, growing up with a stutter. So I know intimately what it feels like to be voiceless, to have something to say, but to choose not to say it or feel as though through either fear or physiologically like I can't. I married a speech therapist. Good choice. Not just for me, more so for my kids and nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, but the thing is we don't need to have a speech impediment to feel voiceless. I think in any given point in time in a relationship in our life or career, we've felt that. The other is being parts in my 20 or so year career, being parts of teams where there is a speak up culture and how marvelous it is to the quality of those relationships, the results, creativity, innovation on those teams, and the health and well-being of the folks on those teams. And then also seeing teams, due to a change in leadership, transform and become more of a shut up culture or a culture of silence, and seeing how destructive that is, not just for the results of the business, but also for the health and well-being and the quality of the relationships for the folks on those teams.
That's so well said. And I guess a follow-up to that is, who do you think guides that speak up culture? Do you think it lives with the CEO, or do you think it goes through the whole leadership team depending on the size of the company?
The answer to that question is yes. So there's an equation that we came up with for culture in the book, and as a CPA as a background, you might resonate with an equation here. So the equation we've devised for culture is culture equals values multiplied by behavior, and that's in a bracket. It's raised to the power of influence. So culture is in the how. It's how we treat each other. It's how work gets done. It's the feeling. It's the behavior of a group of people who belong to the same organization or society, right? The strength of a culture is determined by how clear are the values, right? And how clear are they in behavior? So, Enron had values. They were communication, respect, integrity, and excellence, which is just a joke. I mean, the fact that integrity was one of their values, but like
Yes.
excellence, do me a favor, Mike, more excellence for the rest of the day, please. And you're like right on it. Like excellence
Yeah.
is a kind of meaningless value. I'm a big believer in articulating values as verbs or action phrases. So to me, excellence could be do more of your best work. Ooh, now we're talking. That means I should know my strengths and amplify them. I should be aware of my weaknesses or limitations. I should safeguard against those. I should share those vulnerably with other members of my team. Like those are 5 behaviors underneath one value because we put it into an action phrase. So I'm a big believer in defining values as verbs or action phrases. And then the strength of a culture is the degree to which those values are actually behaved. Now, to answer your question head on, the last piece is all of it is raised to the power of influence. So the more influence one has in a culture, the more that individual's values and behaviors bears weight on the health of a culture. You as a co-founder CEO, your behavior and values matter more on the health of the culture than someone who was hired in a junior role last week, unless you handpick them and now they all of a sudden represent you. So the responsibility to create a speak up culture is at least 51% on senior leaders, but it's not 99. Anyone can choose to bring this to life. Anyone can choose to lead in their work and their relationships. That's why I like to distinguish between capital L and lowercase l leaders. So capital L leaders have the title. We expect them to behave as such. But just because you have the title doesn't mean that you automatically get a hall pass and you're a leader. No, it's earned every moment and day through your behavior. Do you behave in a way that's worth following? And we all know folks who don't have a hierarchy or don't have authority, but they behave in a way that is worth following, and they're a lowercase l leader.
I want to stick on formulas here for a second because like I love
That's
the way
the only one that I know.
and I'm sorry for being a CPA and being a bit of a numbers nerd. So I love the way you explain that. Another framework I've seen you speak about a lot is your 2x2 framework, and I think the axes were impact and safety. Is that correct?
Yes.
So going back to formulas here, because my brain works this way. Influence, like you said, if someone's junior, they have less influence. And so obviously to the power of influence means that you can have in an organization a few key people, but they're calling the shots for all these people and the voices aren't being heard of the whole organization.
Mm-hmm.
But then I guess my follow-up question is to this 2x2 framework. And I would love to ask you to explain it, because why would someone choose not to let the leadership team know if there's holes in the company, things aren't going right, things that are influencing their customers, which ultimately impacts the leadership a whole lot, because it means that if customers aren't happy and the team is not happy, a business just goes in the wrong direction altogether. But I would like to ask you about this 2x2 frame, because I think it's something that's very important of safety and impact. I kind of understand what holds people back from doing it, but I'm just curious for my own sake, what are those things that are causing people to either hold back, or things that they're saying, not saying the most impactful ideas out of fear of the leadership team having a different direction or thinking differently than them?
Yeah. So the 2x2 matrix that you referenced, so it's high safety, high impact. The opposite of safety is danger, and the opposite of impact is apathy. So ideally, you have that upper right quadrant where it both feels safe and worth it to speak up. Now, it feeling safe and worth it doesn't mean absence of fear, which is why I harp against this term. Here's our fearless leader, Mike Pincus. Like, fearless? Really? That's the standard? Like, no, Mike's got fears. And if you don't have fears, there's something wrong with you. Like, to fear is to be human. If it weren't for fear, we wouldn't have courage, right? So a speak up culture is not about absence of fear. It's about feeling safe enough to move through the discomfort of fear and feeling that my speaking up or my doing something will actually yield a positive impact. So if you don't have safety or you don't have high impact, now you get to chip away at why people don't speak up. So I've been parts of teams where I've felt where it isn't safe. In fact, it feels dangerous, and that it isn't worth it. In fact, I felt more apathetic or futile towards speaking up. It's an unhappy marriage between danger and apathy. No fun. Folks choose not to speak up because either they'll get punished, nothing will happen, they'll get blamed for the problem, and out of fear, like debilitating fear to the point that my taking the risk to speak up is going to harm me, even if it could benefit the firm, because the risk feels insurmountable. I think I'm going to get in trouble or get fired. I got a mortgage to pay. I got rent to pay. I got to put food on the table. That's the typical resistance. So then the worthwhile question is, how do you create an environment where folks do feel that it's safe enough and worth it to take that risk? The reason I did this 2x2 matrix is the sort of previous conventional thought around a speak up culture was that you only needed psychological safety. But my experience of it is, Mike, let's say, you and I are great buddies and we've been close for 20 years and I feel safe in our relationship. And I know that there's something that you're doing that is getting in the way of your success, as an example. I feel safe to bring that up to you. But if nothing happens and then I bring it up again and nothing happens and I bring it up again, like how many times do I go back to a dry well before I'm like, it's just not worth it, even if I feel safe? So it's both this dynamic of it feels safe to speak up and it feels worth it.
And on the execution side of that, Stephen, I guess the challenge, business owners run into, and this is one I wanted to ask you prior to the call, like when we were just chatting, the thing I'm thinking about as a business owner, and I'm sure many people are thinking of, is it's a weird position to be in, being an employer. Like the employer-employee relationship in general lacks safety in the sense that someone holds the cards to be able to determine whether you're showing up each day to work. You do not want your team to feel that way. But unfortunately, it is reality that there's a legal contract and there's expectations and there's work-life balance, and the fear exists. A lot of employees within companies don't realize the fear is a mutual fear, meaning as an employer, you're fearful of your team members leaving to competitors or being recruited away. And so I feel like everyone's living in this constant state of fear. Do you think that companies have done a good enough job of drawing awareness to the fact that I don't think as leaders we're vulnerable enough to tell our teams like what our fears are, and if we did, would that open up the gateway for a team to be more vocal about their ideas and things in spite of having fear?
So yes, so you're hitting on, so how, the question of, then how do we create a speak up culture with this constant fear of, do I make a mistake that gets me fired? Or this constant fear from a business owner or a leader, do I show up in a way that causes someone to leave to a competitor, start their own competing firm? List goes on, right? Of which, the only thing that we need to focus on is our inputs, because there's certain things, certain outcomes we have no control over. Just as if you're the coach of your kid's soccer team. If your kid's soccer team play abysmally, but they happen to get lucky and beat a team, you don't say, great work, team. You say, we got lucky. We need to focus on our inputs. Similarly, if the team plays amazing, but you happen to be outplayed and just lose, you can say, we put in our max effort. I'm proud of that. Let's keep going. If we keep playing like that, we're gonna do as well as we possibly can. Keep doing these things right. So I think in some respects we have to divorce ourselves from the output, or the outcome rather, and only marry ourselves to the inputs. But the way to create a speak up culture, it's a virtuous cycle between two actions: encourage people to speak up and then reward them when they do. So encourage to speak up is, your voice matters, I want to hear it. Asking open-ended questions, silence. My favorite story of encourage is an aviation expert, a guy by the name of Ben Berman, who still flies for United to this day. Every time he flies, he says to his crew, I've never flown a perfect flight and today is no exception. I need to know what you see. So a way to encourage folks to speak up is for you as a leader to go first and admit that vulnerability. Now, the trick with vulnerability is not sharing all the things with all the people all the time. That can be irresponsible and oversharing and not suitable for work, right?
Mhm.
Vulnerability requires context. And
Mhm.
vulnerability can be positively and even negatively, but vulnerability can be contagious, hopefully for the better. So for you as a leader, if you say, hey, we want to make Connect CPA the best possible place to work, we make up no illusion that you will work here forever. We hope that you will. We hope that you will grow. But we're going to invest in you as much as we can because we simply think it's the right thing to do. And we hope we earn your loyalty. Even if you move in-house somewhere else or move to a competitor, we still hope that you will speak of us fondly, right? That vulnerability can beget more openness and vulnerability from others as well. On the reward piece, when someone goes like, all right, I'll take the bait. I'll step into the speak up ring. I'll open up the boxing ring, step in, the lights are on me. I'll say the thing. I'll share an idea. I'll give feedback. I'll share a concern, a disagreement, admit a mistake. How does it go? And the biggest importance with reward is, how do you still reward folks when they bring up bad news or hard things to hear? Don't
Mhm.
punish the messenger, reward the message, or at least reward the courage it takes to bring up that thing that they're sharing, not to make things inconvenient. They're sharing, hopefully, to make things better.
Yeah, I think that's incredible advice. And do you think generationally it's harder today to implement that sort of culture? And what I'm getting at is, I remember a time where I put on a suit and tie and went to work at PwC, and the idea that speak up, I mean, I was just grateful. Like, I'm going to clock in, I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can. And I had the fear of life in me that, like, I just wanted to show up. Times have changed a lot. There's a lot more opportunity for people today. And I think for the better. I mean, there's more optionality to all people with technology, being able to work remotely, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's more difficult today to build a speak up culture, given that there is, I think work has changed generationally, or maybe it's just in my head that it has?
I mean, I think it is always a challenge, but I think the younger folks and the younger generations of folks expect to be able to use their voice, expect to be heard, which can be radical, but can also be really valuable. I think, the key thing is, what are still the values and guidelines. So when I think of a speak up culture, there's this sweet spot, where, first of all, speak up is not an instruction. Speak up is a culture. We have to make it safe and worth it for folks to speak up. But a speak up culture includes tact, decency, respect, emotional intelligence, situational awareness, right? What a speak up culture is not, is it's not sucking up, and it's not a
Mhm.
hall pass to be a jerk. And
Mhm.
so, though you want to hear from folks, I think there's still a space to say, how do we conduct ourselves in a way that is still respectful, professional, whatever that might be? There's still room for values. Um, so it's around rewarding truth, but also rewarding folks doing it in a manner that is still respectful. Um, I often think that we treat ourselves as automatic transmissions when we really should treat ourselves as manual transmissions.
I
So
love those days of having a manual car.
yeah, I
Have,
love it too.
have you ever driven manual?
I have. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
It's hard
it's
work, but it's
different.
fantastic. So, but I think it relates to how we can show up and speak up. In an automatic transmission, it's park, drive, reverse,
Mhm.
right? Park is 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 uh is an oscillation between fight and flight. It's freeze. Drive is fight, and reverse is flight. Get out of there. But if we go into drive in a manual transmission, we have up to 6 speeds, maybe even more. And so I think we need to figure out, okay, I do want to speak up, but how do I pick an appropriate time, pick an appropriate tone of voice? What's the language that I use? Like, there's still an art to speaking up in a way that you feel you will be heard, as opposed to just, I'm putting the car in drive and I'm saying the thing. Like, no, how do you speak up in a way that you feel will be received?
I love what you just said about sucking up because I wasn't going to say it, but I'm thinking it. And I love that you actually just addressed it right away where there's got to be authenticity, right, to this. Meaning like if you give your team free reign to speak up, it's like, oh, it's participation time, but that's not what this is about, right?
No.
It's about getting to the core of becoming a better company. I love that you brought that up and just put it at the forefront that a speak up culture, like I guess what I'm trying to understand is the speak up culture is not just literally speaking up, it's being authentic and speaking about the things that need to be heard, right?
Totally. So it's about leaders encouraging and rewarding, asking an open-ended questions, creating silence, like creating the stage and opportunity for folks to step in and share,
Mm-hmm.
going first if you need to. But this spectrum of, oh, Mike says he wants a speak up culture, I'll just speak up about all the things all the time. And the response there, the coaching or feedback is, I'm so glad you feel comfortable using your voice. But the strength of our speak up culture as an organization is not only hearing from you.
Mm-hmm.
We have to create the condition where we hear from a diverse set of voices. So instead of speaking up all the time, pave the way for others to speak up. In fact, here are 3 coins. You can spend them on our team meetings next week. But once you reach 3, you got to zip it, right? So that's on one side. If you're only hearing from the same people about the same things all the time, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a speak up culture.
Mm-hmm.
On the other end is it's not a hall pass to be a jerk. So though we say, yes, we want you to bring your authentic self to work, if your authentic self happens to be jerk or asshole, you still
Mm-hmm.
got to own that.
Right.
So though there might be validity in what you're sharing, the feedback to someone if they show up as a jerk, whether they are aware of it or not, is thank you for raising that. There's validity in what you're sharing. We do need to speak about how you spoke about it and the impact of that behavior. So you can still provide feedback and coaching on the behavior and impact, but reward the intent.
And Stephen, you've worked with a lot of companies, both workshops, speaking engagements. Obviously, you're an expert to the level that you've published a book on the topic. I wanted to ask you, what are the common things you're seeing when you go into companies? What are the attributes of the best leadership teams you see? Like not just the culture of the whole team. I'm curious about you're speaking to a lot of leadership teams. What would you say are some of the like what do the best ones do that the other ones don't?
I think the number one thing is that organizations that truly, or teams that truly have a speak up culture, is they're willing to overcome nice and move into kind. And what I mean by that is oftentimes you have teams or organizations where there's a good culture, but it isn't great. And what separates good from great is the willingness to have the hard conversation, the willingness to respectfully and tactfully disagree. Like one of the myths of a speak up culture is that everyone gets along about all the things
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And it's like, no, the strength of a speak up culture is, do we debate and disagree well?
Mm-hmm.
And when I've worked with teams and I've seen team members go, hey, pause there, can you say that again? I misunderstood you, or can you unpack that point because I don't know if I agree with you? And there's healthy, respectful debate, but we're not attacking people, we're attacking ideas. That
Mm-hmm.
I think is the number one attribute, is the humility and the courage to have open, hard uh, dialogue and commit to getting to take from Stephen Colbert the truthiest of truths.
That's yeah, it's incredible because when you hear speak up culture without getting the context, and this is why I think it's important that people read your book, is without getting the context, you might make an assumption that it's like participation, say what's on your mind. But I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Dalio. He speaks about radical transparency. He keeps
Yeah.
coining that phrase, radical transparency. The reason why I think he uses the word radical is what you just alluded to, which is and I think what you're getting at with speak up culture, is at least my interpretation of what I'm hearing is you do want people to not just speak up, but like those quadrants you spoke about, there are risks, there's fears, there's all these things that are combined and they're nuanced. But you, in spite of that, you still have to have the most difficult of conversations within companies. It isn't just participation, and I feel like at least for myself, I do struggle with that within our company.
Mm.
Um, how do you get, if because they're people have emotions, you, even as a leader, you never want to hurt someone's feelings, but you always want to drive the company forward, meaning when you have a difficult conversation, it's out of love, but
Yeah.
it's still difficult. Do you find that it's as difficult to get the leadership team to be able to speak up about these complex, controversial topics as it is to get the rest of the team? Because you brought up like your formula, level of influence. I'm sure leaders are a huge part of this problem, meaning that they don't want to speak up out of fear that they're going to hurt people's feelings. They don't want people leaving the company. How do you address that when you go into these companies? So the companies that don't have those attributes, how do you address that?
Well, so I think you were speaking about the value of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So, the purpose of feedback is in the first four letters. Feed. It's not called knock down back. Like
Mm-hmm.
the purpose of feedback is to help one another grow. But not all feedback is created equal. So, feedback, it's a low bar if feedback is great job today. Like that's meaningless feedback. What did I do to earn such accolade? And how can I repeat that behavior to earn it again? Similarly, saying to someone, you're lazy or you're irresponsible, that's not good feedback either. So I write about this in, I think, chapter 9, feedback is a dish best shared. So there's an equation. Here's another equation or formula
Love it.
for feedback called FBI, feeling, behavior, impact. And it can transform feedback from being shallow or triggering to actually meaningful and impactful and create changes in behavior. So feeling. So I could transform great work into a better one. So feeling. I feel so supported and enthusiastic. Behavior. Mike, when you did research on the 2x2 framework and you evidently dug in to the concepts of my book, thank you. The impact is I'm in. Anything you want to collaborate on, let's do it. That's way better than great job today,
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, that I'm totally making this up. But let's say I'm late to 3 meetings last week. You could say to me, hey, Shed, I'm feeling disappointed because you were late to 3 meetings last week. The impact is I'm not sure we can trust you with what's on your plate right now. And then the kicker, especially with constructive feedback, is an open-ended question. What's going on? This isn't like you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I often find that if you're feeling fear, name it. Mike, I'm afraid to have this conversation, but I believe in you and I believe in this team, that I feel like the risk to have this conversation is worth it. Are you willing to go there? Are you ready? And then we have the hard conversation. But this funny thing about the human experience is when we dip into the hard stuff, we tend to transcend above it, or at least the right outcome happens. Maybe you have a hard conversation, you realize that someone shouldn't be in this role or shouldn't be on this team, but you can actually get to a place where you mutually decide on the best outcome forward.
Yeah, it's that's an incredible framework. I love that you piece these things down to formulas, and that's an easy one to remember every time that you go to give
FBI.
feedback. And I'm nervous jumping into a one-on-one. I'm going to be saying FBI because it's
Yes.
easy to remember.
And even like write down FBI, feeling, behavior, impact, and write it out yourself, because there's something really honest and vulnerable. Like I just did this yesterday. There's someone on my team that I wanted to give feedback to, and I'm like, do I? I'm not sure. And so I wrote out FBI, and I got to the point where I'm like, no, I don't need to right now. Like this isn't complete yet. I'm gonna let it play for a little bit more, because when I write it out, I can really look at it and see, am I being truthful and honest, or is something else up here?
Yeah, I think that's an incredible way to do it. And I should write more things down. I just struggle in my day to day. I'm always at a computer, and I should have a notepad right beside me and write something along the way.
Nice.
Shed, I wanted to ask you also, like, because there's so much impact to the book that you wrote, on top of the fact that there's reinforcement through speaking engagements and meeting with all these companies and taking them through workshops. Have you thought, or has your company started to measure before and after impacts within the organizations that you've touched, either through workshops, leadership events, or even just feedback on companies and people that have read Speak Up Culture? Are you measuring the data on how this is impacting companies and organizations, or have you not started that path yet of measurement?
Yeah, we're in the early stages of it, of two things: either leaning into assessments that are and engagement surveys that our organizations are already doing and highlighting certain metrics around: is it safe, is it worth it, am I encouraged, is it rewarded? So we are delving into either existing assessments and surveys they use, and exploring and creating our own that we can use. A good chunk of my work, I'll spend 60 minutes with a team. I come in, I do a conversation, I wish them well. But a good chunk of my work, I will do ongoing coaching and facilitation with a leadership team or across an organization. And when we're doing that longer term work, there's some really meaningful data that we can track, that we're in the infant stages of doing that.
I think
But
it'd be so interesting to track, because I do think these things drive profit. And I think even if you looked at just customer retention, employee retention, like some of these metrics, I would love to see the data on it. And I bet there is like a correlation between companies that have an actual authentic speak up culture. But it's hard to measure. I do understand that. It's hard to.
But it's not impossible. There's one fun anecdote, because I think we can do it both with metrics as well as anecdotal feelings. I think it can be both. So there was an organization that I was engaged with I think I did work with them for about 3 or 4 years. And early on in the process, I had a chance to go and deliver an all hands keynote. And then 2 years later, I did an all hands keynote as well. And after the keynote 2 years later, someone from the HR leadership team came up to me and said, "Do you feel that difference?" And I went, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, "I was in the audience 2 years ago, and after your talk two years ago, people stayed. They had 2 drink tickets. They used them. Then they left. They stayed in their fiefdoms. Like there was no cross pollination, and people left as quick as they could. Hopefully with blood alcohol content level that was low enough. But anyway, different conversation. She said 2 years later, people are staying longer. They're not drinking more, but there's energy in the room. There's cross-pollination. Fiefdoms have broken down. There's folks from different levels and different parts of the organization. She's like, this is the impact of all the work that we've been doing, because I was doing workshops and train the trainer and other things. But it was, so yes, we could measure it, but also
it's
the
a feeling.
difference between 2 years of the energy and the cross-pollination, which is good for innovation and good for business and good for relationships. So it's both.
I think, yeah, it's spot on. I think what you said is it's also a feeling, which I think is huge, like for sure. Shed, I know we're running low on time here, so I wanted to ask you one more, and this final one's a bit of a two-parter. You help a lot of businesses, but you're an entrepreneur yourself, and so you mentioned it's almost autobiographical, like where you came up with the genesis of Speak Up Culture. What impact over the next 2 to 3 years are you looking to make with your company? And then I'll let you answer that, and then I'll ask the follow-up, because I don't want you to. What impact are you looking to make over the next 2 to 3 years with the business?
Yeah, so I shared with you before, Mike, that I sort of view myself as an accidental entrepreneur. I've always been entrepreneurial. I never necessarily thought that I would open up my own business or organization. I worked for many years on Simon Sinek's team. I loved that work. I learned so much. And then I never thought I'd write a book of my own. I always wanted to write my grandfather's memoir, which I will. He has an amazing story that I'm going to capture.
Mm-hmm.
But my standard for writing my own book, I would go and give talks on Start With Why from Simon Sinek or The Infinite Game, and I'd be
Mm-hmm.
asked, "Hey Shed, when are you going to write a book of your own?" And my response was always, "If and when I ever come across something worth writing about. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
write a book just cause." But I came across this speak up culture phenomenon and make it safe and make it worth it. So first and foremost, and this is what I so staunchly believed in when I was on Simon's team as well, is we have to live what we preach from the inside out, right? Just like you're a CPA firm, your
Mm-hmm.
books better be good.
Mm-hmm.
If your own
Of course.
internal books aren't good, that's a problem. But
Yeah.
it's not easy. You have to work at it. It's the cobbler's child often doesn't have shoes.
Right.
So first and foremost, the organization that I build and that I'm responsible for building along with my team, we have to live what we preach from the inside out. And it's not my decision if we are. I have a
Mm-hmm.
data point, but it's not my decision. It has to be earned, and we have to receive feedback from the folks that we work with, both inside of our team and our vendors and partners, including you all, that we're living it. And there's nothing better than when our own vendors say, "Thank you so much for the investment of giving us feedback on how we can get better," and likewise. It's the best. The other thing is, in 2 to 3 years, I'm in a business where right now the majority of our income is me showing up live.
Mm-hmm.
The way we describe our business is high touch, medium touch, low touch. So high touch is me showing up in person, keynote, workshops, coaching. Medium touch is me showing up, but in this format, pants are optional. Don't ask me to stand up. But then there's low touch, which takes a lot of effort. But how do we build our own meaningful podcast, online courses, a book? What are
Mm-hmm.
the assets that we can create that can legitimately, not just linearly scale, as you
Yeah.
shared, but scale exponentially,
Exponentially. Yeah.
which is through technology or other means? So that's something that we're working on.
No, that's great. And those 2, 3 years are going to fly by. Believe me.
Yeah,
Final question. I know we're over our time, Shed. I ask
all
this to
good.
everybody. Any advice you'd give to new incoming entrepreneurs? Because I know you mentioned you spent some time on Simon Sinek's team, and obviously Start Why was an incredibly impactful book. Our whole team read it when we were a younger company, and you see millions of hits on Simon's YouTube videos, and a lot of what the messaging and that he's shared is incredibly impactful. So I'm sure you've learned like a lot, even before you started your business. But if you could narrow it down to just like one or two, like really quick lessons, anything that you can share?
Yeah, I would say, especially as you're stepping into a leadership founder role, I think a couple things. So one is, know that your whisper is a shout and your tiptoes are stomps. And everyone is listening, and everyone is watching. Your moves, your words bear weight. The other thing is, the more senior you get, the further away you are at risk of getting from the truth. So the more senior you get, the further away you can get from the truth. We share a good friend in Mike Kravchik.
Yeah.
When Kravchik and Berkovich started their company, it was 2, 3 friends, right? They're just Mike and Adam. But
Mm-hmm.
now they have like what, 65, 70 folks on their team. They're now the co-founders. I'm sure you've felt this experience as well
For
as your
sure.
firm has grown. And so when you walk into a room virtually or otherwise, people sit up straighter. So as a senior leader, especially as your firm grows, know that you need to work especially hard at hearing truth, because we're biologically wired to offer deference to those who are in control or in power. And so we need to work especially hard as senior leaders to gain and hear truth and reward it when it comes, especially if it's hard to hear.
That's incredible advice. You mentioned Michael. He was actually on the podcast just recently, and I'm sure his team's going to listen to this, and I'm sure our team is going to listen to this one as well. And I hope they all both speak up. Last thing, how can
Yes.
people get your book? Where should they contact you, Shed? What's the best place to find you?
Yes, I think for the time being, I'm the only Stephen Shedletzky in the entire population of the human race. So all you handfuls of Shedletskys out there, please choose your
Yes.
children's names wisely. So if you Google me, you'll find me in all the right places. I'm most active on LinkedIn. Our website, you can either go to shedinspires.com or speakupculture.com. And the book you can get through there or on all retailers, Amazon, Indigo, all the places.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies should start sharing the book with their teams and starting to adopt, because I think it's more than just reading, but like adopting these things. But Steve, I just want to thank you so much for joining and sharing these insights. And yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to seeing what happens with the company and Speak Up Culture over the next 2 to 3 years.
Amazing. Thanks, Mike. A joy to join you. I hope this conversation helps all your listeners.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.